Hey everyone, welcome. I was going to get into some of this PowerPoint and some of the stuff about the Green New Deal, one of the social policies they're kind of pushing the past several years. And the chapter on examining a social welfare program within the context of social justice. So like structural components, alternative program characteristics, and evaluation, like how you evaluate it. So they start off with the needs and goals to be met, and social welfare programs are intended to meet a certain need, deal with specific populations, and really enhance life is that ultimate goal. And then they're implemented to achieve particular goals in relation to needs. So, how is the program financed? So usually they say social welfare programs are financed by general revenues and payments by the recipients of the service. So like taxpayers, if you're getting cleaned roads, paved roads, the salt and ice nowadays, paid for by our tax dollars, earmarked employer or employee taxes, and then purchases of service and third-party payments, or a combination of. I wanted to stop for a second and cover this, the Texas mayor, and I think there's a video about it. So if you aren't paying attention to the news, that's okay. That's what I'm here to do. This one, if you can see some of it, I know it's backwards, but you can just search Texas mayor rant. So the Texas mayor quits post after slamming residents as lazy crybabies amid power outages. So if you go in, Texas does not get snow often, so that's a strange view to look at in Texas. And it says, the beginning says, the mayor threw in the towel after going on a heartless rant, calling residents lazy and crybabies as the state suffers from massive power outages and frigid temps. He's resigning. It's Colorado City, Texas, so if you want to look it up. And I'll read it to you before I go into some of the other issues we're covering. So Tim Boyd, obviously mayors and city council members, they set forth policy and different social policies. Like in Cincinnati, we have a lot of homeless policy most recently and little things that help out. So the mayor said, let me hurt some feelings for a while I have a minute. No one owes you or your family anything. I guess it should say, or your family. Nobody owes you anything, nor is it the local government's responsibility to support you during the times like this. Sink or swim, it's your choice. The city and county, along with power providers or any other service, owes you nothing. I'm sick and tired of people looking for a damn handout. If you don't have electricity, you step up and come up with a game plan to keep your family warm and safe. If you have no water, you deal without and think outside of the box and survive and supply water to your family. If you are sitting at home in the cold because you have no power and are sitting there waiting for someone to come rescue you because you're lazy, it should say you are lazy, it is a direct result of your raising. So this is often not said by mayors and city council members, so this is maybe why you quit. Only the strong will survive and the weak will perish. And I think it should say P-E-R-I-S-H, not perish like a church. Folks, God has given us the tools to support ourselves in times like this. This is sadly a product of socialist government where they feed people to believe that the few will work and others will become dependent after handouts. Am I sorry that you have been dealing without electricity and water? Yes. So he's at least apologizing. He's sorry. Um, but I'll be damned if I'm going to provide for anyone that is capable of doing it themselves. I know some places call that subsidiarity. If you can work, you will work or should work. We have lost sight of those in need and those that take advantage of the system and meshed them into one group. Bottom line, quit crying and looking for a handout. Get off your ass and take care of your own family. Bottom line, don't be a part of the problem, be a part of the solution. So I was looking for a video of what's going on in Texas. There are some pictures under here, as you can see. Electric is gone everywhere. So people are basically walking, maybe with electric down, you can't even really pump gas, things of that nature. So let me see if I can find you a video too about not so much this, but what's going on in Texas, because it is very challenging, and this strikes up a debate about the Green New Deal, which is another social policy you could do your paper on. I've forgotten that this was pretty big recently. All right, so here's a few videos about folks surviving. This one's just 34 seconds, but let's see if they even have something to talk about. Because there's supposed to be another storm coming through.
Like, what are you doing, Austin? Seriously.
So this is Austin, Texas. There's a lot. It almost reminds me of what you saw in the grocery stores last year in COVID, coronavirus. So very sad. A few people heated up themselves in their car. You should not do that in your garage. 2 of them died of carbon monoxide poisoning. There was also, this one might not let me watch it because usually they have they usually want you to subscribe. So we'll go ahead and skip theirs. But as you can see, I'll do the Texas power outage. So this kind of gets into policy. Some people are saying they're blaming the green energy, like wind turbines, for what's going on. Some people are saying don't blame the wind turbines. So it's freaking cold down there. It looks pretty rough. So here's some of the videos from CBS if it will let me play it.
If we can generate lightning, it makes it possible to generate a charge even more powerful.
Speaking of which, they said these electric cars down there, prices went up so much that it would cost $900 to fill it up.
Politicians and power industry officials are blaming each other for the failure, but they are not yet able to say how long this will last. Omar Villafranca is in Dallas with a reality check on why these outages are happening. Omar, good morning.
Good morning. We're actually sitting outside of a Dallas power substation, and you may be able to hear that sweet humming sound is actually power coming from the grid. It's working. Texas has its own grid. It is not federally managed. It's managed by the state and nonprofit group called ERCOT. Well, now those two groups are playing the blame game, trying to figure out why they could not keep the lights on for Texans. Every source of power that the state of Texas has been compromised.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott is leaving no one out when it comes to the state's energy failures.
Whether it be renewable power such as wind or solar, but also, as I mentioned today, access to coal generated power, access to gas generated power,
also have been compromised.
For context, in 2020, wind and solar energy were responsible for roughly 25% of the state's electricity generation throughout the year. That compared to natural gas, coal, and nuclear power, which combined for roughly 69%.
The natural gas generators are the ones that we were all counting on to provide the electricity. Some coal plants were supposed to fire up also, and they didn't answer the bell either.
Even if wind was a major source, the reason behind that failure is much of the equipment has not been winterized, which can include using heaters and insulated pipes. That's something places like Minnesota do, and their wind turbines don't shut down in the cold. After a 2011 winter storm in Texas crippled power, a report recommended winterizing power sources. According to HERS, the recommendations were not followed.
The warnings have been there for years, and Governor Abbott has done nothing. Before that, Governor Perry did nothing. This was a train wreck on the way to happening 10 years ago.
Governor Abbott once again blamed ERCOT, the grid manager, but the ERCOT CEO told me that they had to go to the blackouts, otherwise the whole grid could have collapsed. Now, we actually tried to talk to Governor Abbott and two power generating executives, but they either did not want to talk to us or we didn't hear back from them. Tony?
Omar, education for all of us and where our power comes from. Thank you very much.
All right,
Now,
so
an update on a story we called 11,780 votes in January.
So that's kind of what's going on in Texas. There is a lot of challenges. And from that, I wanted to put into perspective this social policy we have about green energy and the Green New Deal, because I would be perfectly okay with you taking, if it was a position paper, arguing either side of it, whether it's good, whether it's cool and neat and helpful, or if it's something that is not sustainable or helpful. So some of the arguments are in the winter time, and I do have solar panels. I've actually taken advantage of some of these subsidies. I have geothermal and I have solar panels. They are completely covered in snow right now, so they're not producing at all. Luckily, I am hooked up to the Cincinnati, Ohio grid. We have heat, but in terms of production, my solar isn't doing much. And that's one of the arguments. So I had two videos, one that's explaining the Green New Deal, and that's from about a year and a half ago, and then one that's from about a year ago that says why the Green New Deal matters. And this is, kind of social policy of how we would get, it becomes a social policy issue, especially when there's power outages. So I don't know if it was so much in the social justice, social policy part until now there's people dying from the cold. It was under the guise of global warming, but because we may be in a grand solar minimum, they're changing this to climate change. So here's the Green New Deal explained, if I can get you moving without an ad. Of course, there's an ad. What would YouTube be without an ad? And as I mentioned, I'm excited because I take advantage of these subsidies, but there may be a point that...
This is a group of the world's best climatologists. Every few years, they gather to tell us what's happening to our warming planet. In 2018, they had some news.
It's very clear that half a degree matters.
This is a chart of how much the global temperature has gone up since we discovered fossil fuels. For a long time, scientists said that we should try to stay under this line, 1.5 degrees Celsius. But that really, we'd be okay if we ended up below this line, 2 degrees. Now they're saying that wasn't quite right, that we're not safe in this zone, and that hitting this line will mean a spike in mass migration, wildfires, deadly heat stress, and it's going to cost us
Trillions of dollars, millions of lives, irreversible, forever.
So that's part of the argument of why it is social policy, that it will cause a lot of countries to be flooded or have extreme heat and drought and challenge their food supply systems. So I'll continue on with this.
Changes that cannot be undone in centuries.
That's what happens if we get warming to stop here. And right now, we're on track to go way past that.
If action is not taken, it will take the planet into an unprecedented climate future if we compare it to what has happened during all of human evolutionary history.
We don't have a plan for this. So a group of American activists started to make one. They recruited a congresswoman and a senator to turn it into a congressional resolution. It's the first step of a plan that is mostly yet to be written. It's called the Green New Deal. And inside, there's something you might not want to hear. This is the Green New Deal resolution. It's only 14 pages.
So the bill, you can look it up. It's Anastasia Ocasio-Cortez, who's the congressperson, and then you also need to have a senator sign on for it to pass into law and become social policy.
And to understand what's in it, it's important to understand what's not.
It is not a bill. It's not legislation. It's not a policy proposal. It's not anything that you could pass and make law.
This is my colleague, David Roberts. Dave's written a lot about the Green New Deal, and he says the 14-page resolution is just a first step.
The idea was, what's our shared understanding of the problem and what's necessary to solve it?
The Green New Deal contains basically two big ideas. The first is this question of what we need to do to solve the impending climate crisis. The Green New Deal says what climate scientists say. We need to completely stop burning fossil fuels as much as technologically feasible.
And I'll continue to provide you guys the counter arguments here. So right now, Texas had their wind turbines freeze. You can look that up. And the solar panels are also covered in snow. So they're very dependent on the oil and gas. So without that, a lot of people are freezing to death. So again, I want you to see both sides of the argument. I do love the environment and think it would be awesome to have different things to help clean it up.
So that means things like rethinking vehicles, energy efficiency standards for buildings, changing the ways that we make steel and concrete.
That's Rihanna Gunn-Reddy. She's part of the think tank that came up with the Green New Deal.
Policy director, New Consensus.
Rihanna writes policy, and she likes to rattle off things that moving away from fossil fuels will entail.
Moving to electric vehicles, make that home energy efficient. The food that you buy will be grown locally.
The Green New Deal requires building a lot of new things, the things to power the world without fossil fuels. And that'll create new jobs, new industries, an entire new economy. But Rihanna...
So it may help the economy. I do agree with that. One of the permaculture arguments is looking into cradle to grave efficiency and all the things that they do have to build and the trillions of debt that may come up while we are building these things. And it may be more sufficient to what they call retrofit buildings. So for example, this building, we have class in here in person. You would retrofit that with insulation and maybe a geothermal system that gets the heat from under the ground. So you would use a lot less gas, oil, and electricity to run it. So instead of building so many new things with lots of new materials and a lot of debt, retrofitting existing buildings may actually be a better plan, and they may do that.
Also emphasizes this is going to inflict a cost.
It's going to be a massive undertaking because we're actually asking how do we rethink the ways that we use energy in our society.
A key principle of the Green New Deal is that it's too late to incrementally move away from fossil fuels. It has to happen quickly and dramatically. Or as Dave puts it,
People don't seem to get it. Zero emissions means zero oil business, means zero natural gas business, no coal business, no internal combustion engine auto business. Like the number zero means it all has to go.
here's what decarbonizing will do. When we rip out fossil fuels from the economy, people are going to lose their jobs. And that means they'll lose their healthcare, maybe their homes. But the Green New Deal also has a second part. And this part acknowledges that transitioning Americans away from fossil fuels is a huge and difficult task, especially at a time when so many live in economic uncertainty.
How can we go to the...
So that stat of one missed paycheck away from poverty is an important social policy statistic that right now a lot of people are already that paycheck into poverty, and that's why the coronavirus relief bill is giving $1,000 again to cover one of the paychecks.
American people and say, I sure hope you are one of the people who loses a job because then you might die like sick on the street. Good luck. Now, will you sign my bill?
This is the contradiction the Green New Deal describes. It's the part we may not want to hear. That we need to take action, and also that taking action will cause pain. Imagine you're a coal worker. If the US decarbonizes, you are going to suffer. So the second part is a set of promises for how Americans will be protected during the transition away from fossil fuels.
Jobs guarantee, public employment, universal health care, education and training.
The basic elements of economic freedom that ought to be promised and due to every citizen of the richest country in the world.
And these promises aren't just for protecting coal workers. They're meant to keep all inequality from getting even worse during the transition. Because think about what direction wealth and power usually flow in when new things get built. It's the communities with the most political clout who decide things can and can't be built. Wealthy corporations jump in to build those projects, and the good jobs go to the people who can afford to get trained for them.
The folks who have the fewest barriers will be the ones who benefit the most, and you're just going to see a replication of the issues that we have now.
In other words, anyone who's historically missed out on those benefits, especially the poor and people of color, could end up even worse off. So the Green New Deal says we should rebuild the American economy in a way that allows opportunity to flow more fairly.
The Green New Deal is about, while we have this chance, why don't we think about that proactively and change it in the ways that people have been calling for it to be changed for generations at this point?
So the first part of the Green New Deal is a set of goals to avoid a global disaster. The second part says we should do it in a way that helps ordinary Americans come out better on the other side. And that's it. That's all that's in these 14 pages. It's just a first step. And now, Brianna's job is to figure out how to go from this 14-page resolution to an actual Green New Deal, a roadmap for what government needs to do next. And their goal is that if Democrats win power in 2020, there's a plan ready to execute. For now, though, the Green New Deal is just asking our leaders to acknowledge the scale of the problems we face. So, how's that going?
This disastrous plan
Would be a massive government takeover and stifle innovation.
Wasteful and reckless spending.
rather than setting
This
realistic
is a group
goals,
of the
we would go from about 94 million cows to 0 cows.
That resolution will not pass the Senate, because there's no way to pay for it.
Destructive, socialist, daydream.
The Green New Deal is a long shot. But right now, it's also the only plan that acknowledges what we know is coming.
What is the world that we want? What is the country that we want? And how do we get there? And how do we get there in a way that is just? And how do we get there in a way that stabilizes the climate and heals our planet? Because if we don't do that, then there will be no paradigm, because there will be nothing to fight for.
So that video was the American take on the Green New Deal. There's also the other large consumer is Europeans. So there is a European take on the Green New Deal, and it's called Why the Green New Deal Matters. So I wanted to put that into there, but first, moving forward on the PowerPoint, this is about residual, institutional, developmental, or socioeconomic asset development. So some of the concepts of social welfare, the residual or minimalists. So individuals' needs should not be met through the market economy and through the family. Also, the social welfare system should step in only when the family and market fail. It is a backup system. So that idea is kind of what the Texas governor or mayor of Colorado City, Texas was saying, is that really And I think the US government has pushed this with federal websites like beprepared.com, and I'll type some of these into the chat. Beprepared.com and a few others that do talk about self-sufficiency and finding ways to make sure your basic needs are met first, kind of what we were going over in the first class. And that's what social policy is here to help with. Food, water, shelter, and these freezing temperatures. It's going to be 0 this weekend again. Heating, so a warm house and a full belly. And climate change is the new term because there is the thought that we have a grand solar minimum coming our way. So instead of global warming, it's actually global cooling, and that's why climate change is what more folks are talking about. So some more concepts of the social welfare. Institutional view sees social welfare as a legitimate function of modern society, a regularized, permanent, necessary, and desirable part of social structure, and set up to prevent or correct problems. So prevention is big. And that was one of the things that they're going over in Texas right now, is some of that stuff could have been prevented if they had winterized their the windmills that you see sometimes driving back up to Chicago or in Indiana, or if they had found ways to make sure that the solar panels don't get covered in snow, things of that nature as prevention. Some other concepts of social welfare, the developmental institution. It helps make living better and improves the quality of life and fulfills human development. And then finally, other concepts, socioeconomic asset development suggests social welfare will manage social problems and meets needs of people. So right now it's food, water, and energy in Texas. A lot of people are struggling without those. And do yourself a favor and search that, look up what's going on in Texas, because it is a very big problem. Also, it helps provide opportunities for advancement to individuals, families, groups, communities, and even whole societies. So is it selective or is it universal? So in selective programs, eligibility is based on a determination of need and the individual financial mean of the potential client. So we have the poverty line. You've watched the movie already about The Line, and it's like about $20-some thousand for a family in America. And if you're below the line, you will get some assistance, food stamps, welfare, some people to help pay the bills. And a universal program is open to anyone who meets a certain class, category, or regional criteria. So that would be more like our coronavirus relief bill. And that's almost everyone in America got a check last year. So that was kind of like a universal basic income. In selective or universal, to go over the cost and efficiency. So the uneven administrative costs of programs and benefit inefficiency when significant amounts of money goes to people who are not needy or not the original target of the program. So that's what they're debating about in Congress on the current coronavirus relief bill, is that they don't want to send a $1,000 check to everyone. So now they're kind of cutting that off if you make $50,000 a year as an individual, or if you make $100,000 as a couple. And that's kind of the debate where they will cut that off. So I want to get more into why the Green New Deal matters, because this is one that's going on. You can see several videos. Again, if you search yourself about the Green New Deal, this can be one of the topics for your papers, because it really is a social policy, and it will affect a lot of us if we go off some of these electric producing technologies. So see if this starts in the right.
Okay, so this is an extremely high-tech $5,000 handheld telescope. It was
get your commercial in, and And here we
You've
go.
probably heard a lot of talk about something called the Green New Deal from some Democrats in the US, the Labour Party in the UK, and school strikers around the world. But what exactly is it, and why does it matter? In the simplest terms, in America, the Green New Deal is a proposed plan by some Democrats that sets out many of the steps the US needs to take to avoid a climate catastrophe. In the UK, the Green New Deal, also known as
a green industrial revolution,
is a similar plan, but refers to a collection of thoughts and policy ideas that have been proposed by environmental activists and economists to tackle climate.
So just to point out, they do include this re-regulation of finance again, what we were talking about last week, and global debt cancellation. So you're getting the monetary piece in there, taxes, decarbonize electric supply, international action. That was like the France climate agreement that the US stepped out of last year, but may get back into this year, and then carbon trading.
Breakdown. Ideas that have now made their way into politics. At its heart, the Green New Deal is a term that encapsulates thinking on how we tackle climate breakdown and make our society fairer.
It's a program to try and decarbonise the economy at pace, but to try and do it in a way that raises living standards, creates thousands and thousands of jobs, and tries to change the economy. And the thing that's really powerful about it is that, you know, the environmental crisis and the economic crisis that we're facing are often seen as two separate things, but they're fundamentally related because they come back to an economy that isn't working for people, that isn't working for the environment.
Governments all over the world are failing on the climate crisis.
So some of the headlines, and again, it was initially covered by Vice President Al Gore in about 2006 as global warming. And it's recently changed to what they call climate change. And the question becomes, is this human-caused climate change or global warming, or is this the cycles that we're in? Grand solar minimum is supposed to be what we will enter from 2021 until 2029. So the world will enter a grand solar minimum. It's a cycle that's about every 300 to 400 years. And you can look that up too. But here's some of the headlines. Climate change, bleak outlook as carbon emissions gap grows. Now remember, carbon is what we exhale, and it also is what the plants breathe in, and the plants exhale oxygen to us, like trees and green leaves and photosynthesis and whatnot. And then another headline was missing the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target will cost $14 trillion in floods. So that's still going off the global warming piece. Lately, we're seeing it's actually been cooling, especially this year. Matter of survival, activists from the Arctic to Pacific Islands fear life beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. The world still isn't meeting its climate goals. Most countries aren't hitting 2030 climate goals, and everyone will pay the price. Australia to miss the 2030 emissions target. And Bleak Report UN says drastic action is on the way. So a lot of these, again, half of them cover global warming, but now it does seem it's actually more of a global cooling that we're seeing, especially. So one other consideration to make it even a more interesting target is the coronavirus shutdown last year had people drive so much less and no one in their work buildings downtown turning on lights and heating the buildings as much. So we actually emitted far less than ever before, like in terms of like the scale that it was going up. So it did start with coronavirus last year. We may already be noticing the slowdown. Oil consumption went way down. In fact, oil prices went below zero, the lowest they'd ever been. And that was more due to the way they're traded on Wall Street. But some other things to consider about the grand solar minimum is that some of this stuff is actually the natural cycles of the earth. And then how do we prepare for it is the big question.
For example, the UK government has been giving subsidies to fossil fuel companies for years. Meanwhile, income inequality is at its worst in decades. And on top of that, how the economy works is bad for our environment.
We're consuming more, we're producing more, 1.5 times our ability to regenerate. The earth can only sustain so much.
Although we've been hearing a lot about it recently, the Green New Deal has been around for over a decade. As the financial crisis hit, a group of environmentalists and economists, drawing inspiration from Roosevelt's New Deal, came up with an initial plan to transform the economy in a way that would deal with climate breakdown. It's a mix of policies across sectors, some transformative, and others, though needed, might seem a little exciting. For example, one plan is simply to make our homes and buildings more energy efficient by installing insulation and double glazing.
So that's the retrofitting of buildings that I was referring to. Instead of wrecking down this house that appears like an over-the-Rhine Cincinnati building, they were built in like the late 1800s and early 1900s. We double up with the insulation, more energy efficient homes, because they had a lot of leaks back then. And some of it I heard was purposeful because you had a lot of gas emissions in the house. So you wanted that to leak out so you didn't die of carbon poisoning. But now with our closed system, we could actually insulate to where there's no air gaps at all and we use a lot less energy. And this makes really good sense.
But one of the major ideas is massive investment in renewables, so we stop using fossil fuels in our day-to-day lives, including in how we generate our electricity. Transport is another area supporters of the Green New Deal say they want to reshape, calling for green, cheaper, or even free public transport, way less car use, and levies for frequent flyers to discourage excess air travel. Green New Deal supporters say this will mean thousands or even millions of decent, rewarding jobs being created, offsetting the ones lost to declining fossil fuel industries. The Green New Deal is also about how to make these changes in the best, fairest way possible. This is what people call a just transition.
People's jobs will have to change and the way they work will have to change, and it's including them in the conversation and also recognizing that they are the best people to listen to and who will have a better understanding of how we can make that change because they're the ones impacted by it. It also gives us an opportunity just to have a conversation with people who are often left behind, right, and are usually the victims of policy change, and saying, no, you don't have to be the victims of policy change. You can help create a policy that creates a better life for you, but also helps us solve this existential crisis that we're facing.
And crucially, a just transition means listening to people globally, including some of those least responsible for the climate crisis, but who are being impacted the most. For example, some say the UK Green New Deal shouldn't continue the destructive extraction of minerals abroad.
The UK has a historic responsibility for decarbonising really quickly because this is the nation that birthed the Industrial Revolution and colonized large parts of the world and used its resources to build the modern society that we live in right now.
However, there's still one big question. Can we afford it?
We can afford it. It's a question of political choices and political will. There's money out there that we're already using, and we're just using it poorly.
Some economists say it could be financed through shifting where subsidies currently go, borrowing to invest, a windfall tax on oil and gas companies, and new jobs, which will create more income and tax revenues. But there's an even bigger question here. Can we afford not to do it?
If you think about the logical conclusion of climate change, right? You think about the chaos in the system, extreme weather conditions, hurricanes, floods, and the human, but also the financial cost of responding to that. So for me, it's not, can we afford it? It's a choice. We either are sensible now and we make decisions now and say, okay, well, this is the cost of trying to manage this thing. Or we sleepwalk into the crisis that science tells us is coming.
The Green New Deal would mean major change on a scale that can be hard to imagine. The climate breakdown is already happening, and the scale of the problem is huge. However, we have all of these ideas in the Green New Deal that would be a real chance to do something about it, and do something about it in a fair and just way. Thank you for watching this video. One of the most interesting things I found while doing the research for it was that some of the thinking around the Green New Deal has been around for quite a while. So we know some of the solutions. It just takes the political will to implement them. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe and click here to support The Guardian.
So, as mentioned, that's the one side of the argument that has been put into Congress, and they're going to vote on it. And we will possibly see this with the Biden administration. Again, I take advantage of those. The solar panels and geothermal were 30% federal tax credit last year, well, about a year and a half ago when I bought my recent house. It was supposed to go down to 26 this year and then 21 next year. And the Biden administration has extended that. So they are subsidizing the solar panels and geothermal and even some of the plug-in cars. The other side of the argument is about the little ice age. So, and there has been a history. They say every 400 years there is the grand solar minimum. So you can see that even in the cycles in the government of China and some of the countries that are affected about the cyclical climate. So some folks help describe that, and it may actually be a ice age that is coming. So I wanted to give the alternative view in case you do write your paper on the Green New Deal policy. Here's the one about the cyclical
API
climate.
plus live channels with no hidden fees. YouTube TV, try it free.
Now, Cardiff University has released a study on ice ages, and it claims that icebergs melting in the Antarctic may actually trigger a reaction that plunges the Earth into an ice age. But I thought alarmists were telling us that our approach to climate was leading us into believing we're the direct cause of global warming and we're all going to boil. Well, here to set the record straight is geologist and earth scientist Ian Plimer. Ian, it's wonderful to have you on the show, and welcome back to Sky News. Before I get into this malarkey about the climate change wars and who's right, I want to ask you how you are. You've been fighting the biggest battle of your life over the last 12 or so months, and how are you coming out the other side?
Well, I'm upright, I'm biped, I'm alive. I've been battling cancer for most of last year, and it never goes away, but we've got it under control, and it's a very interesting experience to go through. You know who your friends are, and my Sky friends contacted me quite often. You were one of them, Rita Panahi, Rowan Dean, Andrew Bolt, all checking in to see that I'm still alive and still fighting and still going to cause trouble. So it is an interesting and sobering experience to have, and I'll have to have maintenance all of my life, but that's the same with any machine. You've got to maintain it and give it a grease and oil every now and then.
But Ian, you are a machine. I tell you, you've dismantled so much of the alarmist rhetoric in respect to climate change and all the nonsense. Your books are legendary for exposing the hypocrisy of them, and so we need you up and willing to fight, keep going. But let's go to this latest study. It reminded me of, I think, a 1971 Time magazine cover warning of a global ice age was impending and we were all going to be destroyed by an ice age. Then we were told we're going to cook, and now we're saying the ice age is coming again. What's going on?
Well, what's going on are cycles. It's normal to have cycles of climate. We are getting towards the end of a warm period. The peak of the warmth was about 5,000 years ago, and we are heading for the next inevitable ice age. Now, I know it will be on a Tuesday. I just can't tell you which Tuesday. But climates are cyclical, and just because you live on planet Earth doesn't mean that you are controlling major planetary systems. For you to think that you can actually control what happens on the planet means you have an ego incommensurate with your knowledge.
But then, with you're a geologist, you deal in timelines that are far greater and longer than the Bureau of Meteorology. The temperatures that we've had in recent years, are they unprecedented in history, or are they normal? Are carbon dioxide concentrations higher or lower than they have been?
We've had 6 major ice ages, during which we've had glaciations, and that's when the ice expands, and warmer periods when the ice retreats. All of that happened before humans were on planet Earth, and every single major ice age started when we had more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than now. To use the word unprecedented shows that you have expunged history and geology from your knowledge. And to use the word climate emergency indicates that you have absolutely no knowledge about the past. You can talk about things being unprecedented or an emergency if you totally get rid of the past. And by having at least 40 years of dumbing down our education system and having people now not taught to be critical and analytical in their thinking, not taught history, not taught planetary history, you can get away with anything. And that's what the environmental alarmists are doing. And the Bureau of Meteorology is doing exactly that by using words like unprecedented. You've only got to go to their own records to show that they're telling walking lies.
Why wouldn't we be surprised that as the education system has been dumbing down the teaching of classical studies and sciences, they're also hijacking the language, as you rightly point out, that unprecedented means it hasn't happened in the last 20 years instead of it hasn't happened in the last 5,000 or 6,000. But for those of us who understand this and have been following it for a long time, it all seems very clear. But what about the people who are starting to question the link between humans and global warming? What are the claims, and are they right, or are they just merely overcooking it?
No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming. If you think it has been shown, please give me the 5 scientific papers that show this. That question has never been answered. Show me that human emissions drive global warming. So we have started with a premise which is demonstrably wrong. It's also not helped by people having very little outdoor experience. We've had an exodus of people from country areas into cities. They live in apartments. They live in air conditioning. They live their life off a screen. They don't experience drought. They don't experience rainfall. They don't experience dust storms. So we have a city-based population that doesn't read the scientific literature, that has had no life experience, and they're telling us the Chicken Little story that the sky's falling in. Well, I'm sorry, folks, there is a very, very large amount of scientific evidence out there that show that we live in exceptionally boring times, and we're just having cycles of climate come and go. Most of them are driven by that great ball of heat in the sky called the sun. And for some odd reason, that ball of heat controls temperature on the Earth. You heard it here first.
Can this beanie hat protect my head?
So there's the other side. There are several videos about the grand solar minimum. I do feel like one of the best is Adapt 2030. They kind of break down what's going on. That's another channel that you can get other information on if you're writing your policy on that. ADA Adapt 2030. That's the YouTube channel name. I'll type that into the chat. So, kind of breaking down how policy and the way it affects us, and the laissez-faire approach, which is kind of what the mayor had suggested, and our PowerPoint, that ideally we do try to take care of ourselves first. There are sometimes circumstances that put that outside of the realm that we could not take care of ourselves. There's natural disasters often, hurricanes, tornadoes, things that come, and there is assistance needed. But in the meantime, when times are good, preparing is helpful to do. So we'll finish halfway through, as I wanted to get into this next week too. So benefits and money, services, or utilities can come for some policy. So like cash income or vouchers to purchase goods. In America, we have the food stamps, and that's one of the topics you could write your paper on. Some of the services can be concrete or take the form of public social utilities. So some of our services, especially as you get older or need the Medicare, Medicaid van that can help drive you to the doctor's office. That's one of the things that's especially come more recently. You also differentiate between the public and the private sector. So the private sector is where they provide direct services, advocacy, and fundraising, and then maybe planning and coordination services in various communities. Private is more make profit in a welfare-related area. And sometimes you see that. I worked for a place that looked like a not-for-profit. It was called Ohio Mentor, and we did counseling for folks with developmental disabilities. They were actually a for-profit. So they would take Medicare and Medicaid as payment, and they were a for-profit private organization. And we'll finish here on adequacy. Adequacy can be measured on the horizontal axis. Did the program reach the target population? So thinking of just like food stamps or heat assistance or things we put out there. Or the vertical axis, is each recipient sufficiently covered? Like, did those food stamps buy enough for just them or their family also, and things of that nature. So some food for thought. I know that this week we did have the talk on monetary policy, and that's not due until February 20th. So we're going to get more into other policies, some of the ideas of the Green New Deal policy and things that affect all of us, especially nowadays, and the coronavirus relief plan. So if you have any questions, again, write them into the chat. Send me an email, come by for office hours or in person class. So even those of you that are online, if you want to come to the third floor of Wesley Hall, Tuesday, Thursdays, we always have class. We did have a snow day this past Tuesday, but we've been here on the regular. So see y'all soon and get everything complete.